My stepsister deceived me and wrecked my life, so I cut ties with my family and reclaimed my future. That summer, when I was 17, my world fell apart. At the time, I didn't realize it. I thought I was just heading out on another one of those family vacations that were supposed to strengthen our bonds, but usually ended up being more hassle than fun. This time, the destination was Clearwater Beach, Florida, a place my dad, Michael, and my stepmom, Deborah, chose because they found an inexpensive beach resort. Clearwater was sweltering, crowded, and noisy, basically the last place I wanted to be. I would have much preferred staying home, working my part-time job and hanging out with my few friends. But declining wasn't an option. My dad didn't take rejection well. So there I was, trapped in a car for hours with my dad, Deborah, and my stepsister, Ella. Ella was 14 at the time, and saying we didn't get along is an understatement. We didn't argue constantly or anything, we just didn't click. I didn't trust her, and she wasn't fond of me. Ella was the type of kid who always got her way. Her mother pampered her, and my dad wasn't much different. She was the golden child, the precious one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was just there, not exactly disliked, but certainly overlooked. I wasn't rebellious or troublesome. I just existed, unnoticed and irrelevant in their world. By the time we reached the resort, my mood was already sour. The place looked fancy in pictures, but turned out to be worn down. The rooms were cramped, the hallways had a faint mildew smell, and our ocean view was merely a narrow gap between two buildings. Of course, my dad and Deborah had their own room, leaving me to share with Ella. That was the first disappointment. I tried to stay optimistic. It was only a few days, right? I could manage. But Ella quickly made me regret that hope. She had a knack for making you feel inferior without uttering a word. She rolled her eyes as I unpacked, loudly grumbled about sharing a bathroom, and gave me judgmental glances whenever I spoke. Just being around her made me feel stupid. By the second day, we were at each other's throats. I can't even remember what set it off. Probably something petty like me using her hairbrush without asking, or her hogging the bathroom when I needed to shower. Suddenly, we were shouting at each other. She threw a pillow at me like a tantrum-throwing child, and I snapped back with a sarcastic comment I can't even recall. After that, Ella gave me the silent treatment. She didn't say a word to me for the rest of the trip. No greetings, no responses, nothing. At first, I thought it was amusing. If she wanted to ignore me, I could return the favor. Honestly, it made things simpler, but the cold shoulder continued even after we got home. For weeks, she acted like I didn't exist. She'd walk by me without a glance, exclude me from dinner table conversations, and pretend I wasn't in the room. I assumed she was just being a dramatic teenager and that she'd eventually get over it. She didn't. Things soon took a strange turn. My dad and Deborah started treating me differently. They weren't openly hostile, but something had shifted. My dad, who usually paid me little attention, barely looked at me when we talked. Deborah began watching me like she was waiting for me to mess up. At first I thought I was imagining it, blaming the awkwardness with Ella for making me paranoid. But then, small incidents happened that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Deborah rummaging through my drawers. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was checking something. When I pressed for more details, she walked away, leaving me feeling violated and confused. What was she searching for? A few days later, I overheard my dad and Deborah whispering in the kitchen. My name came up several times. Though I couldn't catch the full conversation, their tone was harsh, judgmental, almost angry. My stomach dropped as I quietly returned to my room. I didn't understand what was going on, but I had a horrible feeling it was connected to Ella. I soon found out. One evening, while I was doing homework, my dad stormed into my room without knocking, his face red with fury. "Where were you last night?" he demanded. I stared at him, baffled. "What do you mean? I was here," I replied. "Don't lie to me, Hannah," he yelled. "Ella told us she caught you sneaking out again. She said you're hanging around with boys and doing drugs. Is that true?" I gaped at him, speechless. It was so absurd that I almost laughed, thinking he must be joking. But he wasn't. His fists were clenched and his voice shook with anger. "Wait, what?" I said. "I'm not sneaking out and I'm definitely not doing drugs. What is Ella talking about?" My dad didn't believe me for a second. He started shouting about how I was ruining the family, destroying my future, and being a disappointment. I tried to explain that Ella was lying, but he cut me off, yelling over me until I gave up and stayed silent. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why Ella would do this to me. What did she gain by telling such awful lies? I thought back to that trip, to our stupid fight, and wondered if this was her twisted way of getting revenge. Whatever her reasons, the damage was done. It didn't matter. The damage was done. From that night on, everything shifted. My father began treating me like an outsider, or worse, a criminal. Deborah barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was only to criticize or accuse me of lying about my whereabouts. Meanwhile, Ella pretended like nothing had happened. She still refused to talk to me, but occasionally I'd catch her smirking, as if she were proud of what she'd caused. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand her. But one thing was obvious. Ella had flipped my life upside down, and I was clueless about how to fix it. My life started unraveling quickly. Initially, I hoped things would calm down and that my father and Deborah would realize how absurd Ella's lies were. Really? Me sneaking out at night, doing drugs, or selling my body? None of it added up. But I didn't realize just how deep Ella's deceit had spread. For weeks, my dad treated me like a convict under watch. Every time I entered the house, his cold, suspicious gaze followed me. He'd question where I'd been, what I'd done, and who I'd been with. If my answers didn't satisfy him, he doubted me. If I said nothing, I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. There was no winning. Deborah was just as relentless, if not worse. She'd wait until I left for school or work to rummage through my belongings. I'd return home to find my drawers half open, my backpack unzipped, and my closet slightly ajar. Evidence that someone had been searching. Once she confronted me directly, holding up a small plastic bag she'd found. I stared at her, wide-eyed. It was a Ziploc containing only Tylenol. I'd taken the last of it earlier that week for a headache. But to Deborah, it was all the proof she needed. "It's Tylenol," I said, trying to stay composed. "Don't lie to me, Hannah. What are you hiding?" Her voice was sharp and accusatory, making my stomach twist. "I'm not hiding anything," I snapped, feeling my control slip. "It's literally just Tylenol. What's wrong with you?" Deborah shook her head. Disappointment etched on her face. "I don't know what happened to you. You used to be such a good girl." Every day, it was the same. Constant jabs and accusations. It didn't matter what I said. They'd already decided I was guilty. And Ella? She watched it all unfold, wearing that smug grin. I couldn't figure out why she was doing this. Had she always despised me, and I just missed the signs? Or was this her twisted revenge over a petty fight? Whatever the reason, she succeeded. She turned my dad and Deborah against me, and I was powerless to stop it. The worst part was the loneliness. I didn't have many close friends. There were classmates I sat with at lunch or coworkers I made small talk with, but no one I could truly confide in. Honestly, I was embarrassed. How could I tell anyone that my stepsister was spreading rumors, that I was a prostitute, and my parents believed her? Who would even believe me? So I bottled it up. I only spoke to my father and Deborah when absolutely necessary. I spent most of my time in my room, avoiding them. I ate dinner alone, stayed out late whenever possible, and did everything to stay off their radar. I felt like a stranger in my own home, but things kept getting worse. One evening I returned home late after staying at school to complete a group project. It was dark by the time I walked in. My dad was there, waiting. "Where were you?" he barked. I froze, caught off guard. "I told you I had a group project. I was at school." "Don't lie to me, Hannah!" he shouted, his face flushing red. "Ella said she saw you sneaking out earlier. Who were you with? What were you doing?" I stared at him, stunned. "What? I wasn't sneaking out. I was at school. Ask any of my teachers." He didn't care. He was too angry to stop now. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he demanded. Do you think I can't see what's happening? You're ruining your life, Hannah. You're a disgrace." That word, disgrace, hit me like a blow to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why are you listening to Ella?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "She's lying. She's been lying this whole time, and you're just buying into it." That was the wrong thing to say. My dad's face twisted in rage. For a moment, I thought he'd hit me. His fists clenched, his body rigid, he looked ready to explode. "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that," he hissed. "She's a good girl. She wouldn't lie." "Oh, really?" I retorted. "And I would. What have I done to make you think that?" He had no answer, or maybe he just didn't care. He turned and walked away, leaving me there, trembling and trying not to cry. After that night, I realized the truth. Nothing I said mattered. No amount of defending myself would change their minds. Ella had poisoned them against me, and I couldn't fix it. The next morning, Deborah stopped me as I was leaving for school. "You need to straighten up, Hannah," she said, her voice cold and condescending. "Your father and I won't put up with this behavior much longer. If you keep sneaking around and lying, you'll face the consequences." "What consequences?" I asked, my voice icy. "You'll see," she replied, and with that she walked away. That was the point when I began to feel completely defeated. My own family had turned their backs on me, and I was left with no one to rely on, no place to go, and no escape. It felt as though I was trapped in an unending nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Throughout it all, Ella kept smirking whenever I passed her in the hallway. She'd give me that smug, satisfied grin, as if she was proud of what she'd done, like she'd won some twisted game I hadn't realized I was part of. I couldn't handle it anymore. I began staying out of the house as much as possible, lingering at school late or taking extra shifts at work, anything to avoid going back. But the damage was done. My dad and Deborah saw me as a hopeless case, and Ella continued to make things worse. The night my dad threw me out is a memory I'll never forget. It was late, nearly midnight, and I'd stayed at school finishing a project. The moment I walked through the door and saw my dad standing in the hallway, his face red with anger, I knew there was going to be trouble. "Where were you?" he snapped. "I told you, Dad," I said, exhausted. "I was at school working on a project. I can show you my teacher's email if you need proof." "Don't lie to me!" he shouted, his voice booming through the house. "Ella said she saw you sneaking out with some guy earlier. Are you seriously going to deny that?" My heart dropped. "She's lying," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I wasn't sneaking out. I don't know why she's doing this." But before I could finish, his face turned an even deeper shade of red. He clenched his fists and stepped toward me. For the first time, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he slammed his hand down on the kitchen counter so hard the whole house shook. "Get out," he said in a dangerously low voice. "You're a disgrace, Hannah. I can't even look at you." I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to whisper. He repeated his command. I don't even remember grabbing my things. I was on autopilot, stuffing clothes and essentials into a bag, tears streaming down my face. As I walked past Ella's room, she leaned against the doorframe with that same smug expression. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her look said it all. I won. I couldn't bear to look at her. I just kept walking out the front door into the night. For the next few days, I slept on my friend Jessica's couch. We weren't particularly close, but when I texted her saying I had nowhere to go, she didn't hesitate to let me stay. I couldn't bring myself to explain everything. I didn't have the energy for the whole awful story. All I said was that things at home were bad, and I needed some time to sort things out. Those days felt like the longest of my life. I felt numb, drifting through each day in a daze. I'd go to school, work, and then back to Jessica's place, where I'd curl up under a scratchy blanket and stare at the ceiling until I fell asleep. My dad didn't call. Deborah didn't call. And Ella? She probably celebrated. After a week, I knew I couldn't stay with Jessica forever. I found a tiny, run-down studio apartment in a shabby part of town. It was the only place I could afford with my meager savings from my part-time job. The walls were thin, the floor tiles were cracked, and the bathroom sink leaked constantly. But it was mine. For the first time, I had my own space. No Ella, no accusations, no lies hanging over me. At first I thought I'd feel free, but mostly I felt lonely. In the months that followed, I settled into a routine. I picked up more shifts, just barely covering rent and groceries. Most nights I ate ramen noodles. I spent my weekends studying at the library since I couldn't afford Wi-Fi. It was tough, but it was still better than being in that house. I tried to forget my family, but it was impossible. Every night as I lay on that creaky bed, I replayed everything in my mind. Ella's smirk, my dad's accusations, Deborah rifling through my things. I kept wondering, why did Ella do this? Why didn't my dad believe me? What did I do to deserve this? I never found answers. Eventually, life went on. I barely scraped through high school and found a better-paying job at a downtown diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it covered the bills. Gradually, I saved a bit of money and allowed myself to dream of a better future. Then I met Ryan. He was the kind of guy I never expected to be with, steady, kind, and patient. We met at the diner where I worked. One day he came in with some friends, ordered pancakes, and made a silly joke about syrup that made me laugh. At first I didn't think much of him, but he kept returning, always sitting in my section, always smiling like I was the best part of his day. After a few weeks, he asked me out. I hesitated. I didn't feel like I had much to offer. I was still struggling to pay rent and shake off my past. But Ryan didn't care. He saw me, truly saw me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I mattered to someone. Ryan never pressured me to talk about my family. I shared little snippets here and there, just enough for him to understand why I wasn't in touch with them. He didn't dig deeper, and I loved him for that. He was just there to hold my hand when I needed support and to make me laugh when I was feeling low. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a genuine life, one that wasn't controlled by Ella, my dad, or the lies that had ripped us apart. Then, out of nowhere, Liam messaged me. Liam had been Ella's high school boyfriend. I hadn't thought about him in ages, so when his name flashed on my phone screen, I almost dropped it. I stared at the notification for what felt like forever, unsure if I should open it. I didn't want anything to do with Ella or anyone tied to her, but my curiosity won out. The message was brief and direct. "Hey, Hannah, I know it's been ages, but there's something you need to know about Ella." My heart began to race. I typed back, asking what he meant. His reply was almost immediate, and as I read it, my hands started shaking. "She told me everything," he wrote. "Ella admitted she lied about you back then. She made up all that stuff about you sneaking out and doing drugs because she was jealous. She thought you were getting too much attention from guys and couldn't handle it. I'm really sorry, Hannah. I didn't know what she'd done to you, or I would have spoken up sooner." I just sat there staring at my phone, my mind spinning. After all these years, Ella finally confessed. All the lies, the pain, and the countless nights I spent crying had been because of her petty jealousy. I wanted to scream, cry, and travel back in time to shove her confession in my dad's face to prove how wrong he'd been for believing her. Liam sent another message. "If you want to confront her, I'll back you up. I'm sorry for everything." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to storm to my dad's house and force them to face the truth. But another part of me felt exhausted. What would it change? Would an apology give back the years I'd lost? Would it make me forgive them for how they treated me? The answer was no. So I blocked Liam's number, deleted the messages, and tried to move on. But no matter how hard I suppressed it, the weight of it lingered. Ella had ruined my life over something so ridiculous and petty. Even with proof that I wasn't the villain they painted me to be, it didn't bring relief, it just made me furious. Life carried on, but my anger didn't fade. For a while I convinced myself that Liam's message was irrelevant, that Ella's confession changed nothing. My father and Deborah had already chosen to believe the worst about me. They'd believed Ella's lies instead of my truth, and no evidence could undo that. Ryan and I continued to build our life together. By my early 20s, we'd moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. I worked as a supervisor at the diner, and Ryan did carpentry for a local contractor. He was dependable, steady, and made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. During that period, I rarely thought about my family. It hurt too much to remember. Whenever Ryan asked about them, I gave vague responses like, "We're not close," or "It's complicated." He never pushed, and I appreciated that. I didn't need to relive the past when I was finally happy. Then one afternoon my phone rang and everything came flooding back. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, and I almost ignored it. But something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. There was a pause, then a throat clearing. "Hannah, it's your dad." My stomach sank. I hadn't heard his voice in over 5 years. He sounded older, worn down by life. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but a smaller, sadder part of me stayed on the line. "Why are you calling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "We need to talk," he said softly. "It's important." I didn't want to listen. I wanted to tell him to go to hell for all the hurt he'd caused. But despite my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. Curiosity got the best of me. What could he possibly want after all this time? We met at a downtown coffee shop a couple of days later. I chose the location because it was neutral ground, a place I could leave if things went wrong. When I walked in, I saw my dad sitting in the corner, clutching a coffee cup like it was his lifeline. He looked older, his hair grayer, and deep lines etched his face. For a moment I barely recognized him. He stood when he saw me, offering a hesitant smile. "Hey, Hannah." "Hi," I replied without smiling back. We sat down, and silence hung between us, awkward and heavy. I crossed my arms, waiting for him to speak first. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I realize it's been a long while," he murmured, eyes fixed on his coffee cup. "I'm not sure how to begin, but I owe you an apology." I blinked at him, startled. "An apology?" He nodded, lifting his gaze to meet mine for the first time. "I spoke to Ella a while ago. She finally told me the truth, about everything. The lies she spread, the accusations she made about you." My heart seemed to stop beating. My fingers curled around the edge of the table to steady myself. "What do you mean?" "She admitted she fabricated it all," he said in a low voice. "The sneaking out, the drugs, every bit of it. She confessed she was envious of you, and she thought you were getting too much attention. I don't understand why she did it, but she did, and I believed her. I shouldn't have, but I did." A surge of anger hit me, boiling up from years of pain and resentment. I wanted to scream, to ask why he hadn't trusted me, why he chose her lies over my truth, why he cast me aside like I meant nothing. Instead, I said, "So now you believe me? After all these years?" He winced, his expression crumbling. "Yes, and I'm sorry, Hannah. I can't express how much I regret everything. I was blind. I let you down. I let us down." "Yeah, you did," I shot back, my voice quivering with suppressed rage. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? What it was like to lose everything because you refused to hear me out?" "I know," he murmured. "I know I can't undo it, but I want to try." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "You still don't get it, Dad. It's too late. You didn't just disappoint me. You abandoned me. You kicked me out over something that wasn't even true. You let Ella ruin my life and didn't care enough to question it." He opened his mouth to reply, but I cut him off. "I spent years trying to piece my life back together after what she did. I lost my family. I lost everything I thought was solid because you were too blind to see the truth. And now you think saying sorry will fix it all?" My dad's shoulders slumped as he stared down at the table. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. I know I failed you. But you're still my daughter, Hannah, and I don't want to lose you." It felt meaningless. I wanted to tell him to leave, to vanish from my life forever. But instead, I sat there, hollow inside, unable to explain the emptiness I felt. Finally, I said, "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't even know if I want to try." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "I understand. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what else to say. When I eventually stood up to leave, he didn't try to stop me. He just stared into his coffee as if searching for answers he'd never find. After that, I didn't hear from him for some time. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that this chapter had finally closed. Ryan and I continued planning our wedding, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was creating something wonderful for myself. I decided early on not to invite Ella. It didn't matter if she had confessed or if she felt remorse. Her lies had taken too much from me. Ryan completely agreed. He said neither she nor anyone else in my family deserved a place at our wedding. Inviting my dad and Deborah was harder, though. Despite everything, a small part of me still wanted them there. I wanted them to see the life I'd built without their help. I wanted them to understand that I didn't need them to be happy. But of course, nothing with my family ever went smoothly. A week after I sent out the invitations, my dad called again. I hesitated before answering, dreading his words. "Leah's asking why she didn't get an invitation," he said abruptly. My heart sank. Of course it was about her. "She's not invited," I said flatly. There was a long pause. Then he sighed. "Hannah, you need to reconsider. She's truly sorry for what she did. She's been trying to make amends. It's not fair to exclude her." "Fair?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Was it fair when she wrecked my life? Was it fair when you kicked me out because of her lies?" "Hannah?" "No," I interrupted. "If you can't come without her, then don't come at all." A lengthy silence followed before he spoke softly. "I'm sorry you feel that way." I ended the call without another word. The conversation shook me more than I wanted to admit. I sat on the couch, fists clenched, staring into space. Ryan sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "What happened?" he asked, gently. "It's my dad," I said, my voice tight. "He's trying to guilt me into inviting Ella. He said if she can't come, he won't either." Ryan's expression darkened. "Are you serious?" he said. After everything she'd done, I shook my head, feeling the anger rise up once more. "No, it's always the same. She comes first, no matter what she does or how much she hurts me. They still choose her." Ryan wrapped his arms around me, letting me lean on him. "You're doing the right thing, Hannah. You don't owe them anything." I nodded, but the pain remained. It felt so unfair. My own father couldn't attend my wedding without involving Ella. I wasn't sure what hurt more, that he still didn't understand, or that I wasn't even surprised anymore. The weeks before the wedding were a whirlwind of stress and anticipation. Ryan's family was incredible. They were supportive, engaged, and genuinely happy for us. Sometimes it felt like too much to process. His mom busied herself with decorations, his dad helped Ryan construct a gorgeous arch for the ceremony, and his brother Mark even offered to walk me down the aisle. It was everything I'd never experienced with my own family. But even with all the love surrounding me, I couldn't stop thinking about those who wouldn't be there. I kept wondering if my dad would change his mind and show up at the last minute to support me the way a father should. Yet, as the days passed without hearing from him, I knew I couldn't allow myself to hope. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up feeling a strange mix of nerves and serenity. After getting ready, I gazed at myself in the mirror, the soft ivory dress glowing in the morning sun. I looked happy. For the first time in years, I recognized the girl looking back at me. Ryan knocked on the door, smiling. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, and for the first time in a long while I truly was. The ceremony was perfect. Mark walked me down the aisle, and when I saw Ryan waiting for me, all the stress and sadness disappeared. The sun was shining, the flowers were beautiful, and the people who truly mattered were there. As we exchanged vows, I felt a deep sense of peace. For too long I let my family's pain and betrayal define me, but not anymore. Standing there with Ryan, surrounded by love, I understood something important. I didn't need my father's approval or Ella's apology. I didn't need their presence to be happy. I was finally free. After the wedding, life settled into a quiet routine. My dad and Deborah didn't reach out, and Ella stayed out of my life completely. Ryan and I embraced married life, and for the first time in years I felt like I was truly moving forward, unburdened by my past. But of course, with my family, peace never lasts long. About a month later, Deborah sent me a lengthy, rambling text. She went on about missing me, how Ella was supposedly sorry, and how I needed to forgive for the sake of the family. I nearly laughed. Even after everything, they didn't understand. They expected me to just forgive and forget, as if years of hurt and betrayal were trivial. I didn't reply. A week later, my dad emailed me. It was brief and direct. "We miss you. Let's talk." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a mix of sorrow and frustration. Why was it always my responsibility to mend things? Why did I always have to be the one to reach out, to forgive, to make it right? I had given them countless chances, and they had disappointed me every time. I didn't reply to his email either. Instead, I blocked their numbers, deleted their messages, and told myself that this was the end. No more second chances, no more futile hope. Ryan reassured me repeatedly that I was doing the right thing. "You don't owe them anything," he whispered one night, holding me close. "You deserve happiness without their toxicity pulling you down." And he was right. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. I had spent so long seeking their approval, trying to make them understand my perspective. But the truth was, I didn't need them. I had Ryan, his family, my friends, and the life we were building together. That was enough. I'd lived too long under the weight of Ella's lies, but not anymore. I was done looking back. Sometimes you have to let go of those who hurt you, even if they're family. Your happiness, your peace, and your future matter more. And for the first time, I felt sure that I was exactly where I was meant to be.